Welcome to the February 13th edition of Colorado Inside Postgame, a special web-exclusive production here on Channel 12. Let's get a quick take on NBC Nightly News anchor Brian Williams, his 6-month unpaid suspension following reports that he lied about his experience covering the Iraq War in 2003. On the same day, Jon Stewart announced that he will be leaving The Daily Show later in 2014. Patty, this was a huge day for American media. I'm not sure what American viewers are more sad about, losing Brian Williams or losing Jon Stewart. What do you think?
I don't think anyone is particularly sad about losing Brian Williams except the late-night talk show hosts who sometimes had him as a guest. And the fact that he was an entertaining guest maybe shows why ultimately he wasn't the right person to be the managing editor of NBC News, because he wasn't telling the truth. And you really he was embellishing his own memories, let's hope he didn't go further than that. But you want the managing editor of the major newscast to follow journalistic rules. Jon Stewart actually was a great media critic. He wasn't a journalist, but he certainly made news a lot more entertaining and was much more clear in the fact that he was manufacturing things or maybe exaggerating things than Brian Williams was. The week ended on a very sad note. You had Bob Simon, who was a great correspondent for CBS, war correspondent, going through such difficult places, killed in a car wreck in New York City. And then David Carr, who was a great, great journalist, started as an alternative journalist and a heroin addict, kind of the same thing. But wound up being a great media critic himself, wonderful guy at the New York Times who passed away yesterday.
David Copeland from the Independence Institute and DU Law School. This brought up a lot of conversation about journalism and media, but for me it was all about media consumption, that if Brian Williams felt he had to almost support his own brand, like I need to be bigger than the stories I'm covering, even though he was already one of the 3 evening anchor positions that for generations in our country have been the pinnacle of where you get to as an anchor in journalism.
Right, although he had higher ambitions. I think he wanted to be the host of The Tonight Show or one of those things. In journalism, there's a sort of a status disjunction, because on the one hand, if you're on the Today Show or you're the news reader, which is all they really are, for an evening news program, you get to be on TV all the time, which impresses your kid and your kid's friends, and you make a lot of money because you're the public face. But it's also true that within journalism, the people who get the most professional respect are the people who do the real journalistic work, the investigative reporters. The people like Kevin Vaughn from the former Rocky Mountain News, hugely respected throughout Colorado journalism, but certainly not the most famous journalist in Colorado. Brian Williams, as a newsreader, as a pretty face, I think had this psychic disconnect, and so that's why he had to tell all these fish stories about things he'd actually done that were real journalism rather than sitting at a desk and reading a teleprompter.
Eric Sonneman, political analyst. Jon Stewart has, I think, helped redefine how we look at news, because he not only was entertaining, but he brought up how other people were reporting. You did a great job of explaining that with the program. Expand on that a little bit, and maybe are we going to see more of that? Or is going to be somebody out there really wanting to be the next Jon Stewart rather than wanting to be the next Brian Williams?
Interesting question. I have to start by saying it was a very busy time for me, being back in New York City, spending a late night and then an early morning in the executive suites at NBC, where Comcast and NBC Universal decided what to do with Brian Williams, then jumping over to Comedy Central to be part of that decision-making process as well. I was there when news was made.
I'm just glad you had access to Uber. That's good, yeah.
Tongue firmly in cheek. Your question, Dominic, I certainly hope so. I think Jon Stewart, the way he skewered a lot of people, and certainly he skewered the right more than he skewered the left, but fair enough, and that's where Comedy Central comes from. But mostly he skewered journalists, and he skewered pomposity in any profession, and particularly in journalism. And he would dissect a story by just going to the tape and playing the tape, and then obviously putting his unique take on it. And hopefully there won't be another Jon Stewart. You can't replicate that. But hopefully there will be new young talent who have that same inclination to skewer the powers that be.
Penfield Tate, attorney at Greenberg Traurig, also a longtime state lawmaker. What does NBC do from here? It's a 6-month suspension. I think almost everyone reading the story, keeping up with this, thinking, well, he's gone. Brian Williams doesn't come back. How do they, is this a blow to their credibility, and how do they respond to it?
Great question. I'm going to say they fire him. Yes. Then I want to talk about something else real quickly.
Go for it.
It goes to a point you raised earlier where maybe Brian Williams felt he had to become bigger than the story. I think what his episode illustrates, and I think what Stewart did so well in holding the media accountable for some of their reporting, is this weird fascination in America with reality TV stuff. That's really not real because it's manufactured for TV, but we call it reality TV. It's always annoyed me when I watch the news and you see the weather forecast and, oh, here it is, there's a hurricane over here, and you take a picture of it, but you get somebody who jumps in the middle of the storm just to get buffeted about to say, see, it's really bad. I'm like, well, yeah, we knew that. You know, the reporters in Vietnam didn't go get shot just to say they're firing real bullets out here. Something has happened to the media where we've begun this transition from reporting the news, and even if it's just readers, as David said, where you were objectively reporting the news based on the facts as you knew them, versus feeling you had to entertain people and you had to be part of the story. That if you weren't part of the story, you weren't legitimate. Well, you're legitimate if you're giving people factual, verifiable information. And I think that's what we've lost, or we have I think we're close to losing that on a bunch of different network stations. I'm not just going to blame one of my favorite stations that I watch just to hear the counterpoint to what I like to think about, but I think it's a problem all the way across the board. And so hopefully there'll be some soul searching at NBC now that they have to make a replacement.
Mm-hmm. That's all the time we have for Colorado Inside Out postgame this week. Leave us a comment, tell us what you think. For everyone here at CPT12.org, I'm Dominic Dezzutti. Thanks for watching. Good night.